Happy Friday, everyone, and happy Independence Day. If you're living in America, it's July 5th, the day after Independence Day. I hope you guys had a good vacation, or maybe you guys are still on vacation for the long weekend. And if that's the case, maybe you're listening to the podcast version of this as you're out there traveling. A reminder, people who pledge at patreon.com/sifted at $4 or more per month, everybody gets their own private podcast feed for Game Face, for Pactor Factor, and then there's one called Sifted Radio that rounds up all the rest of our content. So even if you're a patron, you might be listening to this show on our Sifted Radio podcast feed, your private Sifted Radio podcast feed. If you are, hope you're having a good vacation, hope you're enjoying your time away. I did cook out yesterday, had some hamburgers and hot dogs, which is my cheat day because I've had to change my diet over the last couple years here due to cholesterol, which sucks. I can't really eat red meat all that often anymore, but I do give myself a cheat day here and there, and yesterday was my cheat day. I had a hamburger from the grill, I had a couple hot dogs from the grill, and man, if you don't get to eat hot dogs very often, when you do get one, they're pretty freaking awesome. So anyway, hope you guys are enjoying your vacation. Hopefully, I'm along for the ride with you guys, wherever you're going. Let's get to this week's question. All right, first up, we have a question from someone who asks questions pretty much every week and does a good job of it, and that is Bachby. If the Bloomberg report about Rocksteady and its actions during the development of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League is true, do you foresee any problems with the development of its next game? Okay, so Bachby is referencing an expose that appeared in Bloomberg about the development of this game as a service. And just to give you a quick synopsis, he actually supplied a synopsis, but it was so much that it wouldn't fit in the graphics. So I'm going to give you a quick synopsis of some of the stuff that happened during the development of the game. First of all, the leads were not listening to the staff about their concerns and the lack of quality as the game went from being a melee-focused game, which makes sense considering Rocksteady made all the Batman games, to being a loot shooter, a third-person shooter where it's driven by a loot, and ultimately probably should have been a game as a service, a free-to-play game as a service, instead of a paid game. Then one of the co-founders, Sefton Hill, admitted he doesn't even really play loot shooters himself, and then the other co-founder left because they knew the game was not going to be received well by fans, and so they left and started a whole new studio while this game was still in development, and took some of the staff with them to boot, which is not going to help the development of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. And then there's some other tidbits that Bachby included, like there was a call to include vehicles in the game, but that didn't make sense because most of the characters could fly, so why would they drive in a car? Again, that kind of goes back to Batman Arkham Knight, which had the Batmobile, which a lot of fans did not like. And so there was a precedent there that fans probably weren't going to appreciate vehicles, but that was a fight that they had to fight internally to win. And then the staff was forced to sign an NDA before they got the job. They thought they were coming to Rocksteady to work on a Batman Arkham-style game, but then they get there, they find out they're working on a loot shooter, but they had signed an NDA, so they couldn't talk about it. Then there was a bunch of people that were coming and leaving because, wanted to stay once they figured out what they were working on. So, to answer your question, is the next Rocksteady game in danger? Sure, it's still a young team that hasn't worked together all that long. My guess is they probably worked on the game together the last year and a half or 2 years, kind of finishing it up and polishing it up. That whole team has not yet sort of went through the whole pre-production process together, start building the engine together, all the stuff that kind of happens behind the scenes before anyone knows the game even exists. They haven't done that as a team yet. That could provide some hiccups, but if you have a good project manager there, which who knows, they may not have a good project manager there. But if they do find a good one that can keep everybody in line and keep everybody on task and keep everybody on deadline, then I don't see why it's less likely for that studio to make a good game versus any other. So I would hold off on basically writing the eulogy of that studio just yet. Okay, next up we have a question from Commander Fett. Do you think that Xbox, PlayStation, or Nintendo should partner with Summer Game Fest? Or do you think they're better off doing their own events and giving Geoff's show an exclusive or two like Sony did with LEGO Horizon? So, if you had asked me this question yesterday, or I had answered it yesterday, I probably would have had a different answer. Today, we found out that PlayStation is going back to Tokyo Game Show for the first time since it announced the PlayStation 5. And I should add, it has not attended any other trade shows either since it announced the PlayStation 5. But in Japan, it's kind of a different story. PlayStation completely dominates in Europe, it's pretty much completely dominating in the US. In Japan, that is not the case. In Japan, Nintendo is eating PlayStation's lunch. The Switch is dominant in Japan. Now, as I've said many times before, the console market there is nothing like what it used to be. It's small. It's even small compared to Europe now. Europe dominates Japan as far as consoles sold. So that market isn't quite as important, yet it's important enough to Sony to do a trade show, which it hasn't done in like 5 years. So what it shows you is that maybe PlayStation's perspective towards trade shows has changed, or it's remained the same, or Jim Ryan was the one who was saying no trade shows, and now he's gone, and PlayStation is like, we're going back to trade shows. Now, E3 came up way too fast after Jim Ryan returning for that to happen. Tokyo Game Show, they have some time. Now, they're not going to Gamescom either, I should add. And again, that's pretty tight, but they're going to Tokyo Game Show, and that is like towards the end of the year. That would give PlayStation enough time to do it. So I wouldn't just say that what's happening at Tokyo Game Show is a one-off thing. It could be, because again, that market is slipping away from PlayStation. PlayStation 5 has not done exceptionally well there. And it could just be that PlayStation's like, look, we need to try to rescue Japan here if we can. That's a possibility. The other possibility could be that PlayStation has been like, you know what? Now that Jim Ryan's not in charge, we do want to go to trade shows. We do want to be a part of that. And we're going to start doing it now. So there's a lot of possibilities that honestly didn't exist just yesterday for this. Now, to answer your question, what do I think PlayStation should do? I agree with Pactor on this, and I disagree with Matt on this. I do think trade shows matter. I do think people pay more attention to a trade show than they do to just some video you put up on the internet. Now, again, an easy argument here is like, well, look at how well PlayStation has done. It has done very well in the US. It has done very well in Europe. It has not done well in Japan. So maybe culturally, trade shows carry more weight in Japan. That seems like a flimsy argument to me, to be honest with you. But personally, I do think, now I wouldn't say that like going to all these little kind of smaller ones makes sense. I think if you're going to go to E3, you're going to go to Gamescom, you're going to go to Tokyo Game Show, and maybe not the other smaller ones, PAX, stuff like that. Maybe you show up if you've got an indie-ish game for something like that. But I think generally, I think they're good for PlayStation and for platform holders. I think it's a good idea for them to attend. I don't see any detriment. It's like people say the money, but the money is pathetic. I mean, okay, ESA overcharges for a booth at E3. What does it charge PlayStation? $10 million? That sounds like a lot to you? That is a pittance. When you're talking about an industry as big as the games industry, it is literally a rounding error. I don't buy that the money part of it is the reason why they've left. And it's an easy sell, because you tell just some gamer who just buys your video games like, well, they were charging us $10 million for a booth for 3 days. And immediately they're going to be like, well, that's insane. Like, I see why PlayStation left. That money means nothing to PlayStation. It literally is a rounding error in a marketing budget for one of its games. So I don't buy the money thing is why PlayStation left in the first place. I think really Jim Ryan just thought that he just didn't want to do it anymore. It's a different strategy. He's like, let's follow this direct thing. It's easier for us. I don't have to get personally involved in those things. I show up for 5 minutes. I introduce it and say, hey, I'm Jim Ryan. Check out these games. And I don't have to like go to LA for like 2 weeks. And I do think there's a little bit of personal responsibility involved in some of this decision making. I mean, they're human beings after all. So should they partner with Game Fest, Geoff Keighley Summer Game Fest? I don't understand where partnering matters. Or are you saying that like it should be Sony State of Play brought to you by Summer Game Fest, meaning Keighley sets up the production and floats the bill, rents the arena, does all the logistics of the show, and then your people just come on and intro their games? Would that be something PlayStation would be interested in? Maybe. But I don't think it eliminates the other part of doing not E3 or Summer Game Fest, which is having demos, playables, trailers, and all that kind of stuff ready for the first week of June. And that could be part of it too. PlayStation could be like, we're sick of asking our development team to deliver these deliverables every May or whatever in preparation for E3 in June. That could be part of it as well. Maybe they're trying to give some of their developers some relief or whatever. But these developers are already putting out demos all the time. Like, it's not like things have changed that much since these publishers have stopped going to E3. In fact, publishers are publishing more demos than ever and are having more like early access looks in beta and alpha than ever before. So I just don't buy a lot of the arguments that people use for why PlayStation won't do E3. So, back to your question again, should they partner? Maybe. If it's more likely for them to attend if they partnered with Geoff and Summer Game Fest, then absolutely. I just think it's good to have all three of the big three in on the biggest week of video game marketing of the entire year. And let's just be honest, even though it's not called E3 anymore, not E3 and Summer Game Fest are still the biggest marketing opportunities for games every year. It hasn't changed. So, should they partner with Geoff? If it means it's more likely they'll be there, sure. Will it make their shows better or deliver better on the marketing spend? Maybe, because they would spend a lot less money on it, and maybe they could rationalize it. So, I guess I would be okay with it. I mean, obviously, that's another opportunity for Geoff to make more cash and kind of keep his monopoly going of big game events in the industry. And that's a little concerning to me, honestly. It has nothing to do with Geoff. I just don't like one person ever having that much power in any situation. So I guess I would say, if it's palatable, yes, they should partner with him. But otherwise, I think no matter what, all three of the big three should be taking part in not E3. And I believe in an official capacity, meaning that they're there, and not that they're just kind of being skeevy and piggybacking on all the money that's being spent and all the other stuff that people are doing, because that's kind of what's happening now. They're like, oh, we'll put up our direct around not E3, and we can just ride that free marketing wave into the short. I mean, that's kind of what's going on right now. So, I think it'd be better if all the big three are at E3. This is no surprise. I've been saying this all along. And it is interesting that PlayStation has kind of relented and is going back to Tokyo Game Show this year, which could be a chink in the armor showing that maybe what it's going to do in the future. Or it could just be like, you know what, we need a little boost in Japan. Let's show up there for our fans and show them what we're working on. So there's a lot of X factors involved in this question. Now you say, should they give them exclusives like Lego Horizon? I mean, if you don't partner in full with Geoff, that's kind of the other option, and it's easy. I mean, it's no skin off any of the big three's backs to give Geoff an exclusive or two. And all three of them have done it. They've all given him stuff for either Summer Game Fest or for the Game Awards at the end of the year. They're very used to doing it. They trust him. They trust his team to not leak stuff out. That's a big part of it, having that trust there. So yeah, I mean, if they decide not to partner with Geoff in the ways I just talked about, then yeah, sure, giving him an exclusive or two is a good idea. Is a good way to stay relevant in that space, even if maybe you're not participating in not E3 or Summer Game Fest on your own. So there's a lot of different avenues the big three can pursue during the not E3 time slot, during Summer Game Fest, etc. It will be interesting to see which one each one of them ultimately decides upon. Okay, our last question for this week's episode comes from Kool-Aid. Hey Shane, I love the 4 or 5 hours of sifted content every single week. Thank you. I appreciate that. Recently, I've also gotten into picking up different types of shoes. Do you have any thoughts on the changing fashion trends over the years since the Air Max 97s? For instance, I've been shocked to find that brands I used to hate, like New Balance, actually make a very comfortable shoe and also indulge in neon colorways that are more appealing to the eye than they used to be. Perhaps millennials are beginning to age into their target demographic. Okay, and I can't say everything about my life with shoes in a 1-minute ad that we run for New York Sneaker Society. Go support them, nysneakersociety.co/sifted. In fact, I just use one of their wipes, and I've been using their products for quite a while now, and this is unsolicited. They're not paying for this. I just want to share with you. I've been using their products for a while now, since our sponsorship started, and I freaking love them. But the one thing I love more than anything are the shoe wipes. So if you order anything from them, make sure you get the wipes. I literally, because I wanted to show this shoe to you for this segment, I just cleaned this shoe up in literally 90 seconds, and it looks brand freaking new. Look at that. Brand new. These shoes, by the way, are like 1.5 years old. And look at them. They look brand new. And that's because of New York Sneaker Society. So anyway, I can't include everything in my relationship with shoes in that ad. And I have been a sneakerhead, shoe head for a really, really long time. It started with the original Air Jordans. When I was in like Pee Wee basketball, they came out. And our whole team got the first Jordans, but not the black and red ones. We got white with like gray, which I think may have been the first ever variant for the original Jordans. So that's kind of where my love affair with shoes started. And then I got into breakdancing in the 80s, mid-late 80s, when it was a huge boon or whatever. And then I started really getting into sneakers because fashion was a big part of hip hop back then. And it kind of is now, but not as much as it was back then. Like if you were into hip hop, you had a certain look to you. You were a b-boy and you looked like a b-boy. And so I got into Puma suedes and fat laces. And I don't even know if you guys even know what those are, but Puma suedes are the shoes, and you would wear fat laces in the Puma suedes. And fat laces are shoelaces that are like this wide. And when you do them right and you layer them, it creates like a block of color, a solid block of color where your shoestrings are supposed to be. And so I got way into that. I had like 3 pairs of Puma suedes. I had black with the red stripe, I had blue with a white stripe, and I had black on black. So anyway, that was kind of my first time I really started like collecting shoes, and then I started skateboarding, and that opened up a whole new universe of shoes. Like when I first started skateboarding, most of the skate shoes were high tops because people were very concerned about turning their ankles. But the other thing about skate shoes is the side needs to be reinforced so that when you ollie, you don't ollie through a pair of shoes in like 2 or 3 days. So you're always looking at like how beefy is the side, how strong is the support in the ankle. So my first like handful of years, I wore high top skateboarding, like airwalk high tops. And then they started going into like the big fat like skate shoe. And I'll be honest with you, those big fat low top skate shoes were basically the skate industry just ripping off Puma suedes. They looked very similar. They didn't have the fat laces in them, but they were very wide. The tongues were really fat. There was definitely some influence in those skate shoes from like the early DC stuff. All those shoes were basically like them just riffing off hip hop style. And I was into that for a long time while I skated. You had to be. Otherwise, you were wearing, shoes that would get beat up in like a day or two. And then from there, I started raving. And it's funny because trainers, as you guys people call them in Europe, we just call them running shoes here, they were an essential tool to the raver because you're dancing literally all night. And that is why Air Max 95s have become a thing. I'm 100% certain on this. It's ravers that made Air Max 95s literally maybe the most popular shoe ever made next to maybe Air Jordans. Because they have the big pillow on the bottom and you could dance in those things all night and your feet wouldn't hurt. When raving first started, people were wearing like Vans and like skate shoes a lot of times because a lot of the scene early on were skaters and punks that moved into raving. And so a lot of people were wearing the old shoes that they wore as punks or skaters to the raves. And then over time, raving started developing its own style. And that's when the Air Max 95s came in. And I'm just telling you, my whole crew wore Air Max 95s. Every single friend of mine had Air Max 95s. And then it became a thing of like, who can find unique colorways of 95s that other people weren't wearing? And we would go to other cities. We were in Philly. We would go to rave in New York or to Baltimore or DC. And people would scope out the 95s and be like, yo, man, where'd you get those orange Air Max 95s or whatever? It was a thing. And then Air Max 97s came, and people bought them. I bought some, but they were never as big as the 95. So to me, the god tier of sneakers, always Air Max 95s. They still look amazing today. It's funny. I see like moms and dads wearing them now. They were 100% raver shoes when they came out. So anyway, on to your question though. I'm talking about how like a lot of these other shoe companies are starting to come around. They're starting to do better, but New Balance, for people who know sneakers, have known New Balance for forever, that they are literally probably the best running shoe and probably the most comfortable shoe. Now, to your point, they were like moms and dad shoes in like the 90s. When we were raving and wearing like Air Max 95s, like the New Balance looked terrible. New Balance has figured it out. Like I wore Adidas Shell Toes for a long time, both in breaking and in raving. That was kind of the crossover shoe for a long time, Adidas Shell Toes. So I had those as well, and even when I was breaking, I had those with fat laces. Run DMC made those popular, obviously. They wrote songs about Adidas. So anyway, you're right. A lot of the smaller shoe companies now are really starting to turn out really good-looking shoes, not just Nike. I mean, look, 80%, 90% of my collection is Nike, but I'm starting to open up my mind to other shoe companies now, and that really hadn't happened for a really long time. So it's good to see. Do I care about all the new stuff? It's kind of funny that like sneaker culture has exploded, and I'm still into it, but not as much as I used to be. So I have like 3 pairs of Dunks instead of like 20, like a lot of people do. Stussy, a lot of times do crossovers with Nike. You saw that in the ad. There's a Stussy box in there. Those are actually Nike shoes that Stussy and Nike work together on. I pretty much buy every one of those and really never wear them because immediately after you buy them, they're worth at least double the price. On eBay or wherever. And I wear some of them, but usually I don't. I just get them, put them in a box and leave them there. And maybe someday I'll sell them, who knows. But anyway, I do not like the new shoe trends, like the Yeezys and all these shoes for $1,000, and you see like YouTubers like cut them in half, and you realize that they're just crap. They're making them for like $5 and selling them for $1,000 just because. And people like sheep go and buy them. Like, I'm not that sneaker guy. I don't like the look of any of those shoes. I think that they look different just so that they look ugly so people remember them. So I'm not so into like the whole $1,000 shoes part of sneaker culture, like all these crazy boutique shoes that are coming out that people get like robbed over. That's not for me. I look for clean style and functionality in pretty much everything I do. Okay, that's it for this edition of Ask Shane Anything. Again, we are rolling this show out in its video form on YouTube. This will be the second episode up there. Hope the YouTube family are enjoying these episodes. Again, if you want to support us, please head to patreon.com/sifted. If you go there and you pledge at $7 or more per month, you're hitting that Ask Shane tier, which means it's way more likely that you'll get your question into the show. And I do want to thank the people who are at that tier, because without them, this show simply would not happen. So hope you guys had a great Independence Day, July 4th. Hope you have a great weekend planned this weekend. We'll see you next Tuesday for Game Face. Have yourself an awesome